Welcome back to Scary Horror Daily. Tonight, let go of the day. Unwind. Let the noise of the outside world fade into the background. You're safe here, for now. Dim the lights, wrap yourself in a blanket, and close your eyes if you'd like. Breathe in and out. We're about to take a journey, not through space, but through silence. Through memory. Through the places that feel just a little too quiet. This story won't scream. It'll whisper. And if you're lucky, you might fall asleep before it gets too close. Now, let the darkness settle. And let the story begin. Elliot hadn't thought about the cabin in 20 years. It had belonged to his grandfather, a quiet, unspeaking man who'd passed away under strange circumstances. A heart attack, they said. Though the whispers around the town of Drosswick claimed he died listening to the trees. Elliot, now 36, didn't believe in such things. He worked in a city with buzzing lights and never dark skies. He hadn't been back to Drosswick since he was a child, since the funeral. His memories of it were as faded as the old photo album he never touched. That is, until the letter arrived. No return address. No stamp. Just a crisp, yellowing envelope with his full name handwritten across the front, Mr. Elliot Heron. Inside, one sentence. The woods are waking. You must come. Folded beneath it was a map, hand-drawn, familiar. The way to the cabin. That night, he tried to sleep. But he kept hearing something outside his apartment window. He lived on the 6th floor. A soft, papery rustling. Not wind. Not leaves. More like pages turning. And when he closed his eyes, he saw trees. Tall and black and swaying in slow motion. Not in the wind, but like they were breathing. The next morning, Elliot packed a bag and left. He didn't know why. Elliot drove for hours. The interstate eventually gave way to narrower, forgotten roads, then gravel, then packed earth. He hadn't used the map in years, but somehow, his hands seemed to remember. His fingers knew when to turn. As if the directions were inked somewhere beneath his skin. The sun began to set behind thin trees that clawed at the light. The landscape turned unfamiliar fast, far too fast. Hadn't there once been a ranger station here? A gas station by the bend? Now, nothing but wilderness. Thick, oppressive forest pressed in on both sides. Pines, yes, but not like he remembered. Taller. Thinner. Closer. They leaned as if eavesdropping. Listening. His GPS had cut out 3 turns ago. The sky shifted to purple. And then he saw it. A road that hadn't been there before. Not carved, not paved, simply present, like something that had been hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right eyes to see it. It was narrower than he remembered. His tires crunched over the path like bones under snow. He knew where it led. The cabin. His grandfather's last retreat. A place spoken of in his childhood only in hushed tones, always paired with odd stories. Doors that never stayed closed. Footsteps on the roof at night. Whispers from the well that were never echoed back. As he drove, he passed an old milestone marker carved in weather-worn stone, Whisper Pines, 1 mile. He hadn't heard that name in years. But now it slipped into his memory like an old song, distant, but clear. He should have turned back. He didn't. Elliot rounded the final bend just as the last smear of sunlight vanished from the sky. There it was. The cabin stood exactly as he remembered, yet impossibly older. The wood looked darker, warped with time. The shingles sagged, the windows clouded with grime. But not abandoned. No dust. No debris. Just paused. Like someone had been living there, then stopped for just a moment, maybe to step out. Maybe to listen. He parked and shut off the engine. Silence swallowed everything. Even the crunch of gravel under his boots sounded wrong, as if muffled by a thick blanket. The air smelled like pine and something else, damp pages, maybe. Mildew and ink. He hesitated on the porch steps. A memory tugged at him, grandfather, on the porch. Sharpening a blade. Not saying a word. Just watching the trees. Like they were about to speak. The front door opened without resistance. No creak. No protest. Just a slow welcome. Inside, the cabin was clean. Still rustic. Fireplace cold, logs stacked neatly beside it. A single armchair faced the hearth. A side table held an open book, its title etched in a language Elliot couldn't read. And then, the sound. WHRSSKK. Like pages flipping somewhere in the cabin, but not by hand. Automatically. Restlessly. Elliot followed it, past the kitchen, down the hallway, past faded family portraits that seemed to tilt when he looked too long. The sound stopped. He opened the door at the end of the hall. It was his grandfather's old study. The shelves were crammed with journals, yellowed and cracking. All identical. All untitled. On the desk sat one, open and unfinished. A fresh page. A fountain pen beside it. The text read, Day 1. He has returned. The trees are listening. I must warn, and nothing more. Elliot felt cold. There was a small note tucked under the pen. Just 2 words, in a hurried scrawl, don't write. That night, Elliot couldn't sleep. The cabin had no electricity, but it had warmth, enough to keep the cold at bay. The fireplace sparked to life with only a single match, the flames curling like they already knew the shape of the wood. But the journal haunted him. It sat untouched on the desk, closed now, though he hadn't closed it. The pen had rolled slightly since he left it. Wind howled outside. Not like a storm, but voices, as if the trees were mimicking speech without understanding the meaning. Low. Constant. Like a chant that never needed to end. He sat in the old armchair by the fire, blanket over his knees, staring into the flames. That's when he noticed it. The ticking. At first, he thought it was the grandfather clock. But the cabin had never had one. He stood. The ticking grew louder when he moved toward the back door, the one that opened directly into the forest. No lights. Just fog, thick and still. The trees beyond the clearing formed a jagged, hunched silhouette. Something shifted among them. A tall figure, just for a second. Then gone. He should have closed the door. Instead, he stepped outside. The forest, the path behind the cabin led into what locals once called the throat. It wasn't on any map. Not even on the hand-drawn one in his envelope. But Elliot remembered it. A trail carved by his grandfather's boots and his own, years ago. But now, the trees pressed closer. Their bark lined with pale striations, like veins. The fog tasted metallic. The ticking grew louder. Then stopped. And a soft voice whispered, not behind him, not ahead, but all around, you're not the first. Elliot froze. You came because you remembered. But memory is an invitation. He turned in slow, mechanical movements. No one was there. But something had changed. The path he had followed was gone. No footprints. No trail. Only pines. Breathing. Listening. Waiting. The fog thickened as Elliot stumbled deeper into the forest. The world grew strangely quiet, as if even the insects had paused to watch. No birds. No crackling branches underfoot. Just a stillness that pressed against his ears like pressure underwater. And then, a shape. Barely visible through the mist. A structure. Not quite a house. Too narrow. Too tall. It leaned slightly, as though it had grown from the trees themselves. Elliot approached it slowly. The front door stood open, revealing only shadow. He stopped just at the edge. This place. It felt wrong in a way he couldn't describe. Not evil. Not violent. But deeply, fundamentally unreal. Like it had once existed in a dream and someone had tried to recreate it in the waking world, but got the angles just a little off. Etched above the doorway, in a script half swallowed by moss, the memory dwells here. Inside, the floor groaned like it was breathing. Elliot stepped in. The walls were covered with shelves, floor to ceiling. And every inch held books, journals, and sheafs of yellowing paper, handwritten in looping, erratic script. The same handwriting he had seen in his grandfather's journal. The air was cold. Dry. The light from outside didn't follow him in. He turned one of the pages at random. Entry 146. Still listening. The cabin does not sleep. The forest keeps whispering in different tongues. My name is not mine anymore. He turned another. Entry 233. I saw myself through the trees. He waved. I did not. The pages began flipping themselves. Faster. Dozens. Hundreds. The books rattled on their shelves. The door slammed shut. And then. Silence. Except, from deeper in the building, footsteps. Coming closer. Measured. Slow. And then, you weren't supposed to come back. Elliot backed against the shelf. The footsteps echoed, not just in the hallway beyond, but within the pages now scattered at his feet. The books trembled slightly, like they were trying to hold their breath. And then the footsteps stopped. A shadow passed the doorway. It paused. And stepped in. At first, he thought it was a reflection, until it moved in ways that didn't match him. The figure was his height. Same build. Same hair, same eyes. Same jacket. But not the same face. Close. Too close. Like someone had drawn him from memory, and then redrawn it wrong. A smile that lingered too long. Eyes that didn't blink often enough. The figure spoke. We were supposed to forget. Its voice was his. Not similar. Identical. But without tone. Without inflection. Like a line recited too many times. Elliot managed, Who, what are you? I'm the page you didn't finish. The sentence that never ended. The figure reached into its coat and pulled out a journal, thin, leather-bound. It handed it to Elliot. He didn't move. Read it, the other Elliot said. Reluctantly, with trembling hands, he opened it. Only a few lines filled the first page. He will come back. He will follow the trees. He will reach the house. He will become me. The last line had been scribbled and rewritten over itself dozens of times until it tore through the paper. Elliot looked up. The figure was gone. The book stopped trembling. But now, the shelves had changed. Where titles once sat, now every spine read only one word, remember. The journal still trembled in Elliot's hands as he climbed the narrow stairs. They creaked under his weight. Not from rot, but from strain, like they resented being remembered. Each step seemed to take longer than it should, as if the house was stretching beneath him. By the time he reached the top, the air felt thinner. Upstairs was a hallway lined with closed doors. Each door had a nameplate. But the names were scratched out, replaced with one word burned into the wood, removed. He hesitated. Then turned the first knob. Inside, a child's bedroom. Dustless. Lit by a small candle that hadn't melted. The bed was empty. But on the pillow sat a cassette recorder. He pressed play. A child's voice crackled through static. I saw the thing in the trees again. It looked like Grandpa. But it wasn't him. He asked me to come closer. I did. Then he took my voice. Click. Silence. He opened the second door. A study, his grandfather's again. The same armchair. Same fireplace. But the flames were moving in reverse, pulling ashes back into logs, smoke drifting downward into the hearth. And in the chair, the figure from before. Smiling again. Elliot whispered, "Why are you following me?" "I'm not. I'm remembering you." It stood. The house groaned. Then the figure vanished, simply erased, like a page torn clean from a notebook. All that remained was a mirror on the far wall. Not dusty. Not cracked. Just quietly waiting. His reflection didn't smile. Didn't move. Didn't blink. Elliot stood before the mirror. The room was utterly silent, save for the slow tick, tick, tick of something unseen. Not a clock. More like dripping water far away. Rhythmic. Endless. His reflection stared back. Same face. Same scars. Same eyes. But it didn't copy him. When Elliot tilted his head slightly, the reflection didn't move. When he stepped left, it stepped forward. Closer. He froze. And then, softly, it spoke. "You left me here." Its voice was quiet. Frayed around the edges. "You buried the truth under time and called it a story. You ran from the trees, but they never let go." Elliot stepped back. "I was a child. I didn't know," the mirror pulsed. "Just once. Like breath fogging glass. But you remembered. Enough to come back. That's all it needed. That's all we needed." The reflection smiled. It reached up toward the glass. And Elliot watched in horror as its fingers pushed through. Like the surface was water. Or soft plastic. They curled in slow, deliberate motion. Not trying to grab him. Inviting. Elliot tried to step away. But his feet were rooted. Not stuck. Held. And then. A second hand. From inside the room. Not the mirror. Cold fingers curled over his shoulder. Elliot turned, no one was there. But the chill stayed. And the mirror now showed not one, but three versions of him. Only one of them blinked. The mirror rippled like water. The air behind Elliot shifted, not with movement, but with decision. As if the house had made up its mind. The reflection stepped backward into the mirror, smiling. And the surface folded inward. Before Elliot could react, the floor beneath him gave out, not breaking, not shattering, turning. He fell forward. Through the glass. On the other side he hit the ground hard. But not painfully. He lay there for a moment, disoriented. No fog. No dust. No cold. The air here was still. The same room surrounded him, but perfect. Polished hardwood. Fresh wallpaper. Windows shining with soft daylight, though he saw no sun. Everything was preserved. Like a memory sharpened until it bled. And in the center of the room was a table. Laid out neatly on its surface were dozens of journals. Each one labeled in gold ink, Elliot Heron, Year 1 Elliot Heron, Year 3 Elliot Heron, Year 7 Elliot Heron. Final he reached for one. The moment his fingers touched the leather, a breath escaped the pages. A voice, his own. "They told me not to write. But how else do you keep from forgetting? I used to think memory was a comfort. But it's a trap. Every word you write down becomes a root. Every sentence becomes a door. The lights dimmed. Somewhere down the hallway, a bell rang. Soft. Clear. Like a dinner bell in an empty house. He stood and followed the sound. Down the hall the house stretched the farther he walked. The corners warped slightly. Furniture reappeared in different spots if he glanced away. A picture of his grandfather was now watching him with mirrored eyes. The hallway ended at a door he didn't recognize. Etched into the wood, "Do not remember this room." But the handle turned. Elliot stepped inside. The door closed behind him on its own. Elliot was surrounded by stillness, the kind that had never been disturbed. The room smelled faintly of wax and old wood, with something sharp beneath it, something like ink or static. There were no windows. Only a desk. And a chair facing away from him. A child's chair. The walls were covered in sketches. Dozens of them. Drawn in charcoal and red pencil. Shaky at first, then growing steady. Too steady. Faces. Faces without eyes. Mouths opened as if screaming, but no sound came. And at the center of the far wall, one large sketch, pinned like a portrait. A house with no door. It looked familiar. Exactly like the place he'd wandered into earlier. His breath caught. He remembered this. A flash of a hallway. His grandfather shouting. Being dragged away from a door just like this. Screaming, "He's in there. I saw him." And his grandfather whispering back, "We don't say his name. He remembers it himself." The chair creaked. Elliot turned slowly. Down the hall. The house stretched the farther he walked. The corners warped slightly. Furniture reappeared in different spots if he glanced away. A picture of his grandfather was now watching him with mirrored eyes. The hallway ended at a door he didn't recognize. Etched into the wood. "Do not remember this room." But the handle turned. Elliot stepped inside. The door closed behind him on its own. Elliot was surrounded by stillness, the kind that had never been disturbed. The room smelled faintly of wax and old wood, with something sharp beneath it, something like ink or static. There were no windows. Only a desk. And a chair facing away from him. A child's chair. The walls were covered in sketches. Dozens of them. Drawn in charcoal and red pencil. Shaky at first, then growing steady. Too steady. Faces. Faces without eyes. Mouths opened as if screaming, but no sound came. And at the center of the far wall, one large sketch, pinned like a portrait. A house with no door. It looked familiar. Exactly like the place he'd wandered into earlier. His breath caught. He remembered this. A flash of a hallway. His grandfather shouting. Being dragged away from a door just like this. Screaming, "He's in there. I saw him." And his grandfather whispering back. "We don't say his name. He remembers it himself." The chair creaked. Elliot turned slowly. And saw himself. But not the same version. Younger. Much younger. 10, maybe 11. The boy stared at him. Eyes hollow. Pale fingers curled around the arms of the chair like claws. He didn't speak. He simply tilted his head and held out a piece of paper. Elliot hesitated. Then took it. One word was scrawled across the center in red. Remember. And suddenly, the walls breathed. Not metaphorically. They breathed. Inward. Outward. As if the house was alive, and this room its lungs. The lights dimmed. And from behind the boy's chair came a voice. "You were always the one who remembered. That's why I stayed with you." Something stepped into the light. Not a person. Not quite. A shape wearing his old pajamas. No eyes. No face. Only a mouth. Grinning far too wide. The thing stepped closer. Its bare feet made no sound on the wooden floor, but Elliot felt each step like a tap behind his eyes. It tilted its head slowly, lips unmoving, yet the voice came again. You locked me here when you were a boy. But I've grown with you. The younger version of Elliot, still seated, trembled. But the faceless mouth leaned down behind him, resting unseen hands on the boy's shoulders. Its grin widened, but did not stretch. It was already as wide as the jaw would allow, like it had been born with too much mouth and nowhere to put the rest. Elliot stepped back. You're not me, he said. The mouth whispered. Not anymore. The walls inhaled deeply. Then exhaled. The pages fluttered. The lights blinked once. And all the sketches on the wall began to change. Mouths opening wider. Eyes beginning to bleed through. Faces starting to form. And all of them. His. The mouth kept speaking, words flowing directly into Elliot's head. You fed me with your forgetting. You watered me with silence. But now you're old enough to write again. And that means I can walk with you. In daylight. In mirrors. In rooms where no one remembers why they're afraid. The seated child Elliot raised his eyes. And softly, painfully, asked. Why did you leave me here? Elliot's throat closed. I was scared. The boy's voice cracked. So was I. The mouth stood taller now. Its grin flattening. Containing teeth that weren't human, more like stone, jagged and ancient, worn smooth by centuries of silence. It stepped forward. Elliot backed into the wall. He reached for the doorknob. There wasn't one. Behind him, something moved beneath the wallpaper. A shape pressing out. A face. Smiling. Not trapped, waiting. Then the room whispered. If you forget me again, I'll remember you. And the floor began to vanish beneath him. The floor gave out like mist parting. No fall. No sensation of motion. Just displacement, like waking from one dream directly into another. Elliot found himself standing in the clearing behind the cabin. No fog now. No sound, either. The trees around him were perfectly still. The sky had turned a flat gray, not cloudy, just, undecided. His hands were shaking. Something was clenched in his fist. He opened it slowly. The paper. Still there. That one word burned into the fibers. Remember. But something new had been added, scrawled in jagged black ink just beneath it. Too late. Elliot turned toward the cabin. Smoke curled from the chimney, impossible. He hadn't lit a fire. The windows, once fogged and empty, now glowed faintly. And then he saw it. A figure. Standing in the second-story window. Watching him. Still. Faceless. But grinning. Not in welcome. Not in threat. Just being. As if it had always stood there, waiting for him to notice. Elliot backed away. His boots cracked a branch. And the figure moved. Slowly. Calmly. Disappearing into the shadow of the room. The front door creaked open, though no wind passed. Elliot didn't run. He walked. Cautiously. And stepped through the door. Inside again. Everything had changed. The cabin was no longer old. It was clean. Lived in. Fresh logs in the fire. A kettle steaming on the stove. But he hadn't done any of it. He called out. Hello. No response. He stepped further in. The hallway was lined with portraits. Not of his grandfather. Not of himself. Just the mouth. Painted in oils. Dozens of them. All grinning. The same mouth. Different frames. He touched one. And every portrait grinned wider at once. From the back room came a sound. A journal slamming shut. Elliot stepped into the study. It was just as it had been before, dimly lit, with the same worn desk, the same stacks of journals. But now, one journal was open, pages fluttering as if caught in a wind that only existed in that corner of the room. And the fire. It crackled calmly in the hearth, but the sound wasn't normal. It wasn't warmth. It was whispering. He moved closer. The voice in the flame grew louder. Clearer. You should have stayed asleep. It was his grandfather's voice. Steady. Cold. Exactly as it had sounded the night before his death. You came back because the forgetting didn't work. You thought silence was safety. The fire flared. For a moment, the flames formed a face, just long enough for Elliot to see the eyes. They were his. The journal on the desk stopped fluttering. He looked down. The newest entry was dated today. In his own handwriting. But he hadn't written anything. And yet the entry read. He returns again. Older. Slower. But still listening. The mouth has not forgotten him. He brings it with him, always. He is the carrier now. The final line bled down the page, growing darker and darker until the ink looked burned into the paper. He can no longer leave. Not until it does. Elliot backed away. The fireplace snapped loudly. And then. Footsteps. His own. From the hallway. He turned. But no one was there. Except. A journal sat open on the floorboards. A fresh page. And one line written on it. You brought it out with you. Elliot ran. Out the front door, across the clearing, past the familiar trees that no longer stood where they should. The path was there, but it wasn't. Where gravel had been, now soft pine needles. Where lanterns once lined the trail, now bones, small ones. Clean. Arranged in spirals pointing inward. The woods weren't watching. They were following. And behind him. Footsteps. Not heavy. Not human. Soft. Bare. Slow. Unhurried. He didn't look back. He just ran. Branches reached out like hands, brushing his arms, snagging his coat. Whispers followed him, familiar voices in unfamiliar tones. Why did you leave us? You remember too much. He's smiling again. He stumbled down a slope, falling hard, face first into a patch of dead ferns. When he lifted his head, the forest was quiet again. Still. Too still. And now, directly in front of him, a path had formed. Not the same one. Narrower. Twisting. Almost alive in its movement. And at the start of it stood a new marker. Memory Lane. Take only what was buried. Elliot backed away slowly. And then he saw it. Standing in the distance, not moving. A boy. No older than 10. Wearing his childhood clothes. Staring straight at him. His mouth stretched too wide, corners trembling like a smile held too long. He didn't speak. But his jaw clicked open. And the same journal page Elliot had seen earlier spilled out. It fell slowly. Fluttered once. And landed at Elliot's feet. He picked it up. One sentence burned into it, fresh and wet. You're not walking out, you're walking back in. The path narrowed behind him the moment Elliot stepped forward. Like a throat closing. The trees bent inward, their trunks shaped less like wood now, and more like spines, curved and tight. Every few feet, new objects lined the sides of the trail, things he hadn't seen in decades. A red bicycle, rusted and bent. His old school backpack. A single sneaker, waterlogged and still tied. Each one real. Each one wrong. He knelt beside the backpack. Inside, only dirt. Packed tightly. And a note, crumpled and sealed in a sandwich bag. He unfolded it. It read. You buried this to forget what happened after the well. But the well didn't forget you. His hands trembled. The path led on, winding like a snake through memory. Ahead, a familiar shape emerged. The well. The same one behind the cabin. But this wasn't the present. This was then. He was 10 again, standing beside it. And so was the boy. The younger him. But now Elliot wasn't just watching. He remembered. This day. He'd leaned over the edge of the well. Not to drop a coin. To listen. Because something had called his name from the dark. He'd forgotten that voice. Until now. Elliot. The whisper rose from the well again. Soft. Greedy. You promised you'd come back. The child Elliot stepped forward and looked down. His reflection was wrong. Not upside down. Smiling. Smiling too wide. Mouth stretching. And then. It pulled him in. No splash. Just absence. Gone. Elliot screamed. Ran to the edge. Nothing inside but darkness. No echo. No bottom. And then behind him. Footsteps again. Not walking this time. Running. Elliot ran. Down the narrowing path. Branches scratched his arms. Roots snatched at his boots. The forest seemed to bend with him, leaning forward, ushering him deeper. Behind him came the running. Fast. Barefoot. Familiar. Like a version of himself that had learned how to move without hesitation. He didn't look back. He couldn't. Because the voice followed too. Let me wear it again. You never needed it. I'll be better this time. Elliot tripped on a root. Fell hard. Rolled. When he looked up. The forest was gone. He lay in a bedroom. His bedroom. Age 10. Old wallpaper, peeling at the corners. Stickers on the dresser. The same poster above the bed, the one of the moon that glowed in the dark. But outside the window. Still trees. Still fog. Still wrong. He stood slowly. Everything here was right in shape, wrong in feeling. The air didn't move. Time didn't move. Only the door behind him creaked open. He turned. And saw himself. Not the smiling child. Not the hollow figure. This version was perfect. Older. Confident. Clean. Elliot's face, but, improved. Sharper jaw. Brighter eyes. Posture that didn't carry weight. You let go of this. Its voice was calm. Smooth. But I didn't. I kept your potential. I kept what you threw away when you chose fear. Elliot backed into the corner of the room. You're not me. Not yet. But I've worn you before. You were just too young to notice. The air shifted. The thing smiled, Elliot's smile, but easier. Let me back in. And its shadow stretched across the room. To his feet. The shadow reached his feet first. It felt cold. Not icy, hollow. Like it lacked something essential, a hole in the room where presence should be. Elliot pressed himself into the corner, his breath loud in the too still air. The better him stood with hands folded neatly behind his back. Patient. Waiting. It was easier, wasn't it? The figure said, tilting its head. When you stopped trying. When you buried the guilt and walked away. Elliot shook his head. I didn't bury anything. I forgot. Exactly. It stepped closer. And when you forget, I grow. I bloom inside the cracks. I polish the version of you the world wanted. Elliot's voice caught in his throat. I'm not, like you. The figure stopped, inches away. Looked him up and down. No. You're the draft. The sketch. I'm the rewrite. And then it did something Elliot hadn't expected. It blinked. Not like a person. Like a mask trying to mimic a human gesture it didn't understand. And in that moment, Elliot saw it. Not flesh. Not blood. Ink. Running just beneath its skin. Writing him. Rewriting. Layer by layer. You're just a story, Elliot whispered. The figure smiled. Aren't we all? Lightning cracked, though there was no window. The room shivered, and the wallpaper began to peel faster, curling and turning brown at the edges. As if time had been paused, and just now caught up. The better him stepped back, eyes never leaving Elliot. Then said softly. You'll call me soon. When the forgetting starts again. That's when I come home. And then. It crumbled. Into paper. Hundreds of torn pages falling all at once. Each with the same title written across the top. The Elliot who stayed. The floor gave a sigh. And the bedroom melted into ash. Elliot landed on solid ground. But not soil. Stone. Cold. Damp. Carved into unnatural curves. He looked around, no longer in the cabin, nor the bedroom, nor the endless trail. He stood in a circular clearing, surrounded by monolithic black trees that reached up, not like branches, but like limbs frozen in agony. The air thrummed like a tuning fork. And in the center of the clearing, a well. But not the same one. This one was older. Larger. Its stones slick with age, blackened by moisture and something darker. Runes were etched into every brick, some written in the looping script from his grandfather's journals, some scratched in frantic claw-like gouges. And hanging above the well, a rope. No bucket. Just a noose. It swayed in air that didn't move. Elliot took a step forward. The ground beneath his boots shifted, not earth, but pages. An endless bed of torn paper and journal covers. He knelt, lifting one. His name on the top. His handwriting. I saw the mouth in the well. It opened wider than sound could carry. It didn't want to eat. It wanted to replace. His fingers trembled. Suddenly, from the well, a soft noise rose, like air whistling between teeth. Not a whisper. A breath. Elliot stood. The well exhaled again. Then, a voice from behind him. It came from here. And so did you. He turned. The boy stood once more. The young version of him, pale and hollow-eyed. But this time, not smiling. Just tired. You dropped me down there when you were 10. And it wore me like a coat. It's been wearing pieces of us both ever since. Elliot felt cold ripple through him. Can we kill it? The boy looked toward the well. Then down at the pages under their feet. We wrote it. That means we can unwrite it. But only if we remember what we gave it to keep quiet. Elliot swallowed. Because he already knew what that was. The well waited. The rope swayed, it's not perfectly tied, as if it knew he was coming. Elliot Heron hadn't written in 5 years. Not in a journal. Not in a notebook. Not even in the margins of a grocery list. He'd moved far from pine forests and rotted wood, far from haunted cabins and the name he never dared speak aloud. He lived in a cramped apartment above a bookstore in Asheville, rainy, gray, quiet. Just the way he liked it. His walls were blank. His mirrors clean. No wells. No whispers. He kept the lights on, even when he slept. But on a Tuesday morning in late October, something changed. It started as it always did, coffee on the stove, kettle hissing, the soft whine of pipes that had aged worse than he had. Elliot moved slowly, carefully. A routine practiced like religion. But when he opened the door to fetch the paper, it was there. A single envelope. Black. No stamp. No name. The paper was thick. Cold to the touch. He didn't move at first. Just stared. The mailbox was rusted shut, and the envelope wasn't on the welcome mat. It was propped upright, as if someone had pressed it into place with deliberate care. He picked it up. There was a weight to it, not heavy, but significant. Inside, a photograph. Not glossy. Matte. Yellowing at the edges. A picture of a well. But not the one from Whisper Pines. This one was twisted, unnatural. Its stones were cracked and wet. Vines grew out from inside it, black and vein-like, pulsing against the stone. The trees in the background were skeletal. Nothing green. No life. Written across the bottom of the photo, in a familiar, looping hand. One root always grows back. His fingers began to tremble. He dropped the photo and backed into the apartment, heart hammering against his ribs. He slammed the door shut, locked it twice, and stared at the floor. The air changed. He could feel it. Like something had found the scent again. Elliot didn't sleep that night. He sat in the kitchen, every light on, drinking cold coffee with shaking hands. He tried to burn the photo. The flames wouldn't catch. He shredded it. Threw the pieces down the garbage chute. In the morning, it was back. Same envelope. Same place. Same words. But now there was something new. On the back of the photo, scratched so faintly he had to squint to see it. You wrote me once. Why won't you write me again? Elliot didn't scream. He didn't cry. He simply turned to his bookshelf, pulled down the journal he swore he'd never touch again, and opened it to the last blank page. And for the first time in 5 years, he wrote. I thought it was over. I was wrong. The journal sat on the table like it had never left. Thick cover, frayed corners, pages that smelled faintly of ash and cedar. A part of him wanted to believe this was just some long-forgotten copy, something he'd overlooked during one of his rushed, late-night purges. But he knew better. This was the journal. The one from the cabin. The one that had once written back. Elliot traced the edges of the last blank page with his thumb, hesitating over the lines he'd written the night before. I thought it was over. I was wrong. The ink had dried fast. But now, it shimmered. Not in light. In memory. Words, even years later, still moved if you looked at them long enough. That was how it always started. The air in his apartment had grown heavier since the envelope arrived. Not colder, quieter. The kind of quiet that muffles the edges of thought, where even your heartbeat feels like an echo down the hall. He flipped the page. Blank. He didn't write. Not yet. Instead, he reached for the drawer in the hallway, the one where he'd kept his last tether to the past. A Polaroid, creased at the corners, from his 12th birthday. Isla. She was there, smiling. Crouched beside him, holding a carved wooden owl she'd given him. He hadn't looked at this photo in years. Not since Whisper Pines. He stared at it. The owl in her hands, gone. Vanished from the image. And her smile? No longer there. Instead, her mouth was closed tight. Too tight. As if something had been drawn over it. He turned the photo over. Nothing. But when he looked back, there was a mark on his kitchen wall. A small, hand-drawn circle with lines scratched through it, like roots splitting from a center. It hadn't been there yesterday. Elliot stood, heart pounding, and checked the rest of the apartment. More marks. Small ones at first. In corners. Behind the bathroom mirror. Etched faintly into the condensation on the shower tile. He wiped one away, only for it to bleed back through the surface a few seconds later. Something had come back with the envelope. Not the mouth. Not yet. Something smaller. The roots. They weren't just in the well anymore. They were growing. He went back to the journal. Put pen to paper. And wrote. I saw her again. Isla. She looked different. I think she's trying to speak, but something's covering her mouth. The ink bled for a moment. And then it dried. But in the next line, Elliot's hand didn't move. The journal wrote on its own. She's not trying to speak. She's trying to warn you. Elliot pushed the journal away, heart racing. Something scraped beneath the floorboards. Then the lights flickered. And from somewhere near the front door, so faint he could barely hear it, came a knock. 3 times. No footsteps. No shadow under the door. Just silence. And a second envelope. This one pulsed. The knock hadn't come again. Just those 3 soft thuds, more like knuckles brushing wood than asking to be let in. Elliot stood motionless, one hand still hovering over the edge of the journal. His other clenched tightly around the pen, though he hadn't realized it until it began to hurt. The apartment was utterly still. The only sound was his breath. Slow. Controlled. Barely. He moved to the door and paused. Not because he was afraid to open it. But because something wanted him to. He felt that same sensation from the cabin 5 years ago, that subtle tension in the air, the kind you can't see but feel in your molars, in the spaces between thoughts. Like something unseen was leaning in behind the drywall. He unlocked the door. Opened it. No one stood there. But the second envelope was waiting. This time it wasn't resting against the floor. It was nailed to the doorframe. A single, rusted tack driven straight through its center, pinning it to the wood like a moth in a display case. He hesitated. Then pulled it free. Inside was no photo. Just a sheet of parchment, old, yellow, curling at the edges like it had been near a fire. Written in the center, in the same looping hand as before, was a sentence. You buried her. But the roots remember. Underneath the sentence was a smear. Not ink. Not ash. Something darker. Organic. His hand shook. And then the words began to move. He stared as the ink stretched like wet muscle, bending and twisting into new symbols. The same ones now drawn on his bathroom mirror. The parchment curled inward. Then caught fire. Without flame. Just heat. It disintegrated in his hands. No smoke. No ash. Only silence. And a sound behind him. A single, soft word, whispered from the hallway. Elliot. He spun. No one there. But on the hallway wall. A handprint. Small. Child-sized. And underneath it, scribbled in fresh black ink. I'm still down there. His throat closed. He hadn't heard that voice in 5 years. But he knew it. Isla. She was still in the well. Still buried in whatever they thought had ended. And now, it wanted her back. Or worse, wanted him to dig. Elliot barely slept. He lay on the couch, lights on, journal on the table, and the remnants of the second envelope sealed in a Ziploc bag, though it had already begun to fade, like it was never there to begin with. When the sun finally rose, gray and sluggish through the city haze, he dressed, packed his journal, and walked 10 blocks to Asheville Public Library. He hadn't been there in years. Not since the last time he tried to research the history of Whisper Pines and was told by the clerk, an older woman with cataract-clouded eyes, that some things don't get archived, they wait. But this time, the name came to him clearly. The Blackroot Manifesto. He didn't know how he knew it. It just came. The name felt old. Like a name passed in whispers between people who didn't want to admit they'd read it. The library was almost empty, just a janitor pushing a squeaky cart down the marble aisles and a young woman behind the counter reading something in Braille. Elliot approached cautiously. "Hi. I'm looking for an old regional document, possibly a banned one. Called the Blackroot Manifesto." The woman blinked slowly. Set her book aside. Didn't speak. Just stared. Elliot tried again. "It's connected to forest cults. Maybe something from the 1940s or 50s. Finally, she stood. And walked. He followed her down a series of unlit aisles, past the normal stacks and into an area marked archival, "Do not enter." She didn't look back. When they reached the very end, under a flickering light and beside a row of empty display cases, she knelt down and pulled a drawer from a locked cabinet. Inside, old leather-bound ledgers. Charred photographs. Newspapers with blacked-out headlines. She retrieved a small, cloth-wrapped book. Placed it gently into Elliot's hands. Still didn't say a word. And walked away. The book was wrapped in some kind of thin canvas. Dusty. Smelled of moss and vinegar. He opened it. No title page. No introduction. Just. "We fed the first one by accident. But it grew like truth, twisted and unwelcome." Each page was handwritten. Some in ink. Others in coal. A few in what looked darker. The manifesto described other wells. Not just the one from Whisper Pines. But 3. Each deeper than the last. Each built over voids. Each seeded with a story, one that would be forgotten, then rewritten by the forest itself. The book said something else. The mouth is not the god. It is the letter that speaks the god. And if it learns your name, it can sign you away. Elliot slammed the book shut. His hands were shaking again. But when he looked down, his name had been written in the corner of the floor tile beside his foot. In looping, wet ink. Elliot Heron. Signed. Filed. Rooted. Elliot sat alone in the back corner of the Asheville Library's archives, the Blackroot Manifesto open in his lap. Dust hung in the air like slow-falling ash, catching in the beam of the one flickering light overhead. He was surrounded by silence, true silence, the kind that wrapped around his ribs like damp cloth. He reread the passage again. There were 3 wells. One to seed the forest. One to feed the mouth. One to open the name. There was no further explanation. But on the following page, scrawled in a hand much messier than the rest, were the words. 2 have been closed. But one still breathes. The breath hit him first. Not from the book. From below. A slow, moist draft, rising through the library floor. He froze. then looked down. There, beneath the shelves and carpet and tile, was something breathing. Not moving air like a vent. Something deeper. Slower. Like lungs that had forgotten time. He stepped back. The draft stopped. The book, still open in his hands, had changed. The ink had bled slightly. A map had formed. Crude. Scratched between the older lines. It showed Ashvale. His apartment building. The library. And beneath the library, a circled spot labeled only 3. The third well. It wasn't hidden in some faraway pine forest or overgrown cemetery. It was underneath the town. Underneath him. That night, Elliot didn't go home. He returned to the library after hours, sneaking through a cracked side door into the basement, an area long condemned after structural instability in the 80s. He walked with only the light of his phone and the book wrapped tightly under his arm. Every step deeper felt like stepping back into Whisper Pines, not because of what he saw, but because of what he remembered. How it all began. How Isla had screamed when the mouth first smiled. How he had run. How he had forgotten. At the bottom of the stairwell was a rusted metal door. Its hinges screeched when pushed. Behind it, darkness. But not empty. At the far end of the concrete chamber was a hole. Perfectly round. Lined with damp brick. No rope. No bucket. No light. Just a breath. Waiting. He stepped closer. The air smelled familiar. Wet earth. Old books. Something sweeter. Ink. As he approached, a sound echoed from the well's mouth, not a voice. A sound like pages turning, but not by hand. As if the well itself was rifling through its contents. Then, a voice. Not spoken aloud. But inside his head. Soft. Precise. The third well is not for feeding. It is for signing. Write your name, Elliot. And I will let her go. They existed more than they were heard, etched directly into Elliot's thoughts like ink soaking into paper, each letter carved behind his eyes. Write your name, Elliot. And I will let her go. He stood at the edge of the third well, breath sharp and shallow, the air around him pulsing in quiet rhythm with his heartbeat. The walls of the library's basement bled moisture. The ground was slick with some dark sheen, and yet the hole, the well, remained dry. Too dry. The brick was bone white. Not in color. In texture. He crouched down, hand trembling slightly, and peered in. It looked back. Not with eyes. With pages. Thousands, maybe millions, pressed against each other, turning slightly with every whisper of movement. There was no bottom. Only that slow, rhythmic fluttering of something alive made of stories and silence. A scent drifted up, cedar, ash, and something familiar. The smell of the cabin. The ink in his veins seemed to warm. He clenched his fist. The voice returned. We are not monsters, Elliot. We are memory. And she is a memory you abandoned. His chest tightened. You buried her to protect yourself. We kept her. We wrote her into the hollow so you could forget without guilt. The light from his phone began to flicker. He checked the screen. A text notification. From Isla. Only one word. Don't. The screen cracked. Not from impact. From inside. A black root spread through the LCD like a vine, branching beneath the glass. The phone fell from his hand, skittering across the concrete. Elliot grabbed the journal from his bag and held it tight. The voice pulsed again, deeper now, firmer. She is not gone. But to retrieve her, she must be written back. And only the one who forgot may sign the return. A piece of parchment uncurled from the lip of the well. A pen rose from the depths. Waiting. The moment his fingers brushed the pen, Isla's voice screamed in his head, raw, young, and panicked. "You're not writing me, you're writing it." The well pulsed. The journal in his hand flipped open on its own. A single line scrawled across the top of the page. Signature. Elliot stared. His heart thundered. Write the name, and get Isla back. Or walk away, and leave her trapped in ink and shadow. But what if writing didn't rescue her? What if it made her part of it? Suddenly, behind him, a sound, something dragging through the basement darkness. Slow. Wet. He turned. And saw it. Not the mouth. Something new. A man-shaped figure, faceless and slick with dripping pages instead of skin, each sheet etched with Elliot's memories. His 5th birthday. His first nightmare. His mother dying. His first kiss. All printed and peeling. The figure reached out, its fingers curling into a point. And from inside it, Isla's voice again. "He's not trying to trick you. He's trying to become you." Elliot didn't move. The pen in his hand felt too heavy now, more than wood and metal. It pulsed with heat, like a living thing, or like it had been soaking too long in the blood of forgotten names. Before him, the man-shaped figure stepped closer. Its body rustled. Paper creased with every motion. Thin sheets peeled away from its limbs and slithered to the floor. Words scrawled across its chest, its arms, its face, his words. Childhood journal entries, school essays, scribbled secrets from pages he'd burned long ago. It was him, written. But wrong. Its head tilted. Where a face should have been, there was only parchment, fluttering slightly, as if reading itself. "He's not trying to trick you," Isla's voice repeated in his head. "He's trying to become you." Elliot backed toward the well, the journal still clutched tightly. The figure paused. Its paper skin quivered. Then it spoke. Not with sound, but in shifting lines of ink that scrawled rapidly across its chest. Elliot Heron. Signed. Weak. Forgetful. Replaced. He shook his head. "No. I'm not signing anything." The figure lifted one arm. Fingers pointed toward the pen. The well responded. The air shifted. The temperature dropped, not to cold, but to absence. Heat, memory, breath, all evacuated at once. A new voice rose from the well, not the mouth, not the thing before him, but something deeper. Something beneath even the third well. It sounded like ink boiling. "You were the first to forget. That makes you the first to be rewritten." The journal trembled in his hands. Pages flipped violently, against the wind. A new page revealed itself. This one already had something written. Elliot Heron. Date, unknown. Status, draft. He dropped the journal. Took a step back. Then another. The figure lunged forward. Pages flew like wings, wrapping the space between them in a cyclone of tearing parchment. Every sheet carried a phrase, a headline, a diary entry, fragments of lives Elliot had long buried. He turned to run. But the door out of the basement was gone. Erased. Painted over by pages of him. They peeled from the walls and ceiling, rustling as they reassembled around the room. He was inside his own biography. And it was about to be revised. Elliot screamed. Not in fear. In defiance. He snatched the pen from the floor. Held it high like a weapon. The figure paused, hesitated. And in that instant, Elliot stabbed it straight into the center of the figure's chest. The tip punctured the paper skin with a sickening tear. Ink exploded outward, not red, not black, but a deep, rotten brown. The figure convulsed. Pages curled and blackened. Words twisted. Letters reversed. Some fell away like ash. Others crawled back into the well. "You cannot stop the draft," the voice in his head wailed. "Only sign it." But Elliot had learned something. He didn't need to sign it. The tires of the old Ford Explorer crunched over gravel as Natalie gripped the steering wheel tighter, her eyes flicking between the GPS and the narrow country road ahead. The last turnoff had been unmarked, just a crooked sign hidden behind overgrown weeds that read, Hollow Pines Road. Beyond it, the road twisted into dense forest, the kind that swallowed light and didn't give it back. Almost there, she muttered to herself, her voice breaking the silence in the car. Her phone, resting in the cup holder, had lost signal half an hour ago. Branches scraped the sides of the vehicle as she drove deeper into the woods. She hadn't seen another car since leaving the interstate. Even the sunlight seemed reluctant to follow her past the tree line, casting the forest in a sickly gray-green shade. She rolled down her window slightly. The air smelled like wet earth and something else, old wood, maybe. Or decay. She was on her way to catalog an abandoned house for a historical preservation project, a weekend gig she'd picked up through her university's anthropology department. The location wasn't officially on any map, just passed around by rumor and rural legend. A family home built in the late 1800s and left untouched since the 1950s. Everyone just called it the Delacroix house. Suddenly, her headlights caught the outline of something ahead, a rusted iron gate, flanked by two broken stone pillars wrapped in ivy. The gate had been left open, just wide enough for a car to slip through. As she approached, the forest behind her seemed to sigh, like it was relieved to let her go. She passed through the gate slowly, the car's suspension creaking. The house appeared at the end of the drive, rising from the woods like a tombstone, tall, dark, and too still. The paint was stripped down to the bones, and the porch sagged like a tired mouth. Natalie killed the engine. Silence. She grabbed her duffel bag, stepped out, and the air greeted her with a hush. Not a bird, not a bug, just wind rustling through the pines. She turned toward the house, clutching the key the department had mailed her. There it stood, 3 stories of shuttered windows and shadowed gables, with a collapsed chimney leaning like a trunk. A widow's walk crowned the roof, its railings broken like teeth. Natalie took a breath. Then she walked up the steps, one creaking plank at a time. The door was already slightly open. The door moaned open with little effort, as if it had been waiting for her touch. Inside, the air was cold and stale, thick with the scent of old wood, mildew, and something faintly metallic, like rusted nails or dried blood. Natalie hesitated on the threshold, her hand still clutching the key even though she hadn't needed it. Her boots echoed faintly as she stepped inside. The foyer was wide and gloomy, the wallpaper peeling in long curls from the walls like shedding skin. A staircase loomed to her right, winding up into shadow. Directly ahead, a long hallway stretched deeper into the house, lined with shuttered doors and broken picture frames. Dust danced in the air, disturbed for the first time in decades. She flicked on her flashlight. The beam quivered slightly in her grip as it passed over cracked floorboards and a once grand chandelier hanging askew above her. A distant drip echoed from somewhere unseen. Natalie pulled her notebook from her duffel and began her usual ritual. Sketch the layout, note any unique features, and most importantly, photograph everything. She snapped a photo of the foyer. The flash illuminated the space for a fraction of a second, but when the image previewed on her camera screen, she frowned. There was something wrong. In the corner of the frame, just at the top of the staircase, a dark smudge, tall, vaguely human-shaped. She lowered the camera, pointed the flashlight upward. Nothing there. The steps creaked softly under the weight of time, but they were empty. Probably dust on the lens, she whispered, though her voice didn't carry far. The air swallowed sound like a tomb. She moved down the hall, passing by a dusty coat rack still holding a moth-eaten overcoat and a wide-brimmed woman's hat. More photos. More sketches. Everything decayed, yet strangely preserved. The furniture was still in place, a sofa with stuffing bursting through, a glass cabinet filled with cloudy porcelain dolls that stared blankly forward. As she reached the end of the hallway, she stopped. There was a door on her left, slightly ajar. A narrow set of stairs behind it led downward into darkness, probably the basement. She didn't plan to go down there yet. But just as she started to turn away, she heard it. A voice. Soft. Barely audible. Like it had traveled a great distance to reach her. Natali. She froze, heart hammering in her chest. The voice had come from below, from the basement. It wasn't angry, or even sinister, it sounded, pleading. Like someone in pain. She whipped around and shone her flashlight down the stairs. Nothing but blackness. No one knew she was here. No one could be here. Still gripping her flashlight, she reached out and quietly pushed the basement door shut. Click. The latch caught. She stepped away and continued her exploration, but with every creak of the house, every flicker of her flashlight, she felt it now. She wasn't alone. Natali decided to focus on the second floor. The heavy atmosphere pressing down on the first floor made it hard to breathe, like the house itself was weighing her down. She returned to the staircase and ascended cautiously, the old wood groaning beneath her. Each step echoed oddly, like the house had extra space hidden between its walls where sound could get lost. The air grew colder the higher she climbed. The second floor opened to a narrow hallway, walls lined with dusty portraits whose faces had faded with time. One of them, she noticed, had claw marks gouged across it, 3 deep gashes carved straight through a man's face. She stepped closer. The cuts weren't from age or rot. They were deliberate. A strange static hum buzzed in her ears. Trying to shake the unease, she moved toward the first open door. It led into what must have once been a young girl's bedroom. Faded pink wallpaper peeled in strips from the walls, and a cracked dollhouse sat in the corner, its tiny roof broken in half. On the bed lay a stuffed bear, one button eye missing, its mouth stitched into a strange grin. She took another photo. This time, when she checked the preview, the screen flickered, just once, and then displayed the image. But in this one, the bear's head was turned toward the camera. Natali stared at it. The real bear on the bed hadn't moved. She tried another photo. Nothing changed. "Stop freaking yourself out," she mumbled. She turned to leave when something caught her eye. Across the hall was a closed door with a thin red ribbon tied around the knob. Unlike the others, the wood looked newer, less rotten, and there wasn't a trace of dust on it. She reached for the handle. The door opened with a hiss, and her flashlight immediately caught the glint of a mirror. It dominated the far wall of the room, its frame deep crimson and carved with strange symbols she didn't recognize. The mirror's surface was perfectly clean, too clean. Natali stepped inside. The rest of the room was empty, bare wooden floors and unadorned walls. No furniture, no windows, just the mirror. Her flashlight dimmed slightly as she approached. She raised her camera to photograph it, but the instant she looked through the viewfinder, her blood ran cold. Her reflection wasn't hers. In the mirror, she saw herself standing exactly as she was. Except her mouth was sewn shut with black thread, and her eyes were wide open and completely white. Behind her, in the reflection, stood a tall figure, its face wrapped in cloth, its long arms outstretched, fingers bent backward at impossible angles. She dropped the camera with a gasp and turned. No one was there. When she turned back to the mirror, it showed only her, normal, terrified, alone. The figure was gone. Something in her chest twisted with a deep, primal instinct. This room didn't want her here. She backed out slowly, keeping her eyes on the mirror until the door closed. Then she tied the red ribbon back around the knob. It felt like a warning. And now, she was sure of it. Something had seen her. Natalie didn't sleep that night. She had brought a sleeping bag, a thermos of coffee, and every intention of making it a productive work weekend, but after the mirror incident, something in her body refused to rest. Instead, she paced the second floor, checking her camera every few minutes, hoping the images would somehow make more sense. They didn't. The photo of the mirror, her sewn mouth, the pale-eyed doppelganger, the figure behind her, remained exactly the same. The file wouldn't delete either. Every time she tried, her screen glitched, and the photo returned. Unchanged. Unyielding. Just after 1 a.m., the scratching started. At first, it was faint. Natalie thought it might be a branch brushing the side of the house. But it grew louder. More deliberate. It came from above, directly above her head. Slow, rhythmic dragging sounds across the floorboards. There was a third floor, she remembered. The attic level. She hadn't checked it yet. She tried to tell herself it was raccoons or squirrels, maybe birds nesting in the eaves. But then she heard something else. Footsteps. Not the frantic scurrying of animals, but the careful, shuffling tread of something, walking. Pausing. Shuffling again. Natalie grabbed her flashlight and crept up to the second-floor hallway ceiling. A small square hatch sat at the top of a pull-down ladder she hadn't noticed before. The string dangled in front of her. She hesitated. The scratching stopped. Silence hung in the air like fog. Then the footsteps resumed, directly above the hatch. She reached out and yanked the string. Thunk. The ladder unfurled slowly, its wooden joints creaking, revealing a yawning black square in the ceiling. Cold air rushed out, smelling of dust, mold, and something older, like rot beneath floorboards. Natalie's flashlight flickered. She tapped it. The beam steadied. One step. Then another. She climbed slowly, the groaning wood beneath her feet sounding louder than it should have. As her head broke the plane of the attic floor, she swept her light in an arc. The space was cavernous and low-ceilinged. Wooden beams stretched across like ribs. Old trunks and covered furniture lined the walls beneath a thin layer of dust and cobwebs. But that wasn't what made her freeze. It was the writing. Scrawled across the walls in dark, faded red, everywhere, were hundreds of handprints, all child-sized. Around them, words were etched deep into the wood, repeating over and over. Don't look at the face. Don't look at the face. Don't look at the face. Behind her, the ladder creaked. She spun around, but no one was there. Then she heard breathing. Slow. Wet. Coming from just behind one of the old trunks in the corner. Something was waiting. Watching. Natalie took one step back. The breathing stopped. Then came the whisper, low and ragged. You've seen it now. Natalie's breath caught in her throat as the door clicked shut behind her. She lunged back to the handle, twisting and pulling, locked again. She hadn't touched the key, hadn't heard it turn. She was trapped. The flickering gas lamp on the desk hummed faintly, casting long shadows against the shelves. Dust motes swirled in the light like disturbed spirits. Natalie steadied herself and turned back toward the papers. Beneath the disturbing anatomical sketches lay a thick, leather-bound journal. The cover was brittle, but the binding intact. Embossed in faded gold leaf were the initials. E.D. She sat down cautiously and opened it. The pages inside were yellowed, densely packed with ink, lines slanted, precise, almost too neat. She flipped to the first entry. March 4, 1891. Today I heard the knocking again, 3 times from beneath the floorboards in the girl's room. The child insists she heard someone humming near her bed at night. I dismissed it as a dream, but Clara now claims to have seen a figure on the widow's walk. I fear the house is awakening once more. I must proceed. Natalie's eyes narrowed. The dates spanned decades, dozens of entries. She flipped to a bookmarked section. The handwriting grew erratic. October 12, 1895. The mirror room was not my invention, it was here before me. Hidden behind false walls. I broke the seals to study it. The red glass is not glass. It reflects truths the human mind cannot contain. Clara begged me to destroy it. I could not. The entity needs reflection. It only exists when we give it form. November 3, 1895. I watched my own body walk across the room. I remained seated. The mirror is a gate, not a window. It's calling to Natalie now. I have not spoken that name aloud. Yet I write it with trembling certainty. She comes. She must. Natalie jerked back, her pulse thunderous. Her name. Written in a book from the 1800s. Suddenly, a wind howled through the room. The fireless hearth let out a low groan. The globe in the corner began to spin, slowly at first, then faster, faster, until it whirled with unnatural speed. Books tumbled from the shelves as if shaken by unseen hands. Natalie grabbed the journal and backed away. The globe exploded in a thunderous crack, shards embedding in the walls. The shadows on the ceiling began to move, crawling, slithering, not following any logic of light. And then, silence. As quickly as it began, the room fell still. Natalie turned the journal over in her hands, heart pounding. There was something tucked into the back cover, a brittle photograph. A family of 4, a man in a stiff suit, a woman in a high-neck dress, a young girl with glassy eyes, and a boy no older than 10. In the background was the house. The little girl was holding a mirror. Its surface was black. A quiet click echoed from the door behind her. It had unlocked itself. Natalie didn't hesitate. She ran. Natalie didn't stop running until she reached the bottom of the stairs, nearly stumbling in the dark as her boots pounded the warped floorboards. Her flashlight trembled in her grip. The journal was clutched tightly to her chest, the leather damp from sweat. The house was silent again. Too silent. No wind. No groaning timbers. Even the oppressive creaks had stilled, like the house was holding its breath. Natalie stopped in the foyer, just across from the door that led to the basement. That door. The one she had closed. The one that had whispered her name. It was open. Not wide, just enough, like it had eased itself open over time. Like it had waited until now. She approached slowly, careful not to step too close, afraid of what she might see in the dark. But she had to know. The journal, Dr. Delacroix's journal, had mentioned something about the basement. The entity. The mirror. She pointed her flashlight into the stairwell. The beam caught the top few steps, then was swallowed by blackness. From below, came the sound of water dripping. She descended. Each step groaned under her weight. The air thickened as she went deeper, it felt humid and sticky, as though the house's very breath was turning to fog. The wooden stairs eventually gave way to cold, uneven stone. The basement was massive, far larger than it should have been. Stone walls stretched into darkness, broken only by thick wooden support beams and the occasional crumbling shelf. She spotted a rusted furnace, a few broken crates, old tools, and then something else. Another door. Not made of wood, but heavy iron. It was inset into the stone like a vault, covered in the same arcane markings she'd seen on the mirror's frame. Above it, scrawled in black paint, was a warning. Do not unlock. The face is not yours. Natalie's skin crawled. She flipped to the last page of the journal. January 2nd, 1896. Clara is gone. She stood before the mirror and vanished, her eyes were white, and her mouth stitched itself shut. The entity has claimed her. I sealed the lower chamber with iron and runes. But the mirror hungers. The girl who returns will be her blood. If you are reading this, Natalie. It knows your name because it wrote it first. Burn the house. Leave nothing. Don't look at the face. Don't look. Don't. The last line trailed off into jagged ink scratches. From behind the iron door came a low, slow scrape, metal against metal. Then, something tapped. Once. Twice. 3 times. Natalie backed away. The flashlight flickered again, and for just a split second, she saw something reflected in the door's surface. A figure. Mouth sewn shut. White eyes. Reaching toward her. She turned and fled, the sound of footsteps rising behind her, not running, but dragging. Slow and patient. As if whatever was behind that door knew, eventually, she'd come back. Natalie didn't stop until she was outside the house. She burst through the front door and stumbled down the rotting steps, hands shaking, lungs burning as she dragged in the night air. The forest was silent, the wind dead. Even the cicadas that had buzzed all afternoon were gone. Her flashlight beam jittered over the gnarled pine trunks, catching the white glint of lichen and the occasional scrap of moss swaying like wet hair. She stood in the overgrown front yard, the cold moon hanging full and bloated above the house. She had to leave. The thought came hard and fast. The journal clutched in her hand felt heavier now, like it carried more than words. She made her way to the car, heart pounding, trying not to look back, but her keys weren't in her pocket. They weren't in her bag either. Panicked, she appended her duffel on the hood of the Explorer. Books, water bottle, spare batteries, protein bar, no keys. No phone signal, no flashlight charger, and the road was miles from town. She had to go back inside. Just long enough to grab the keys. She told herself it would be quick. One last room. One last check. Then she'd walk if she had to. Back inside, the house was darker than before. The flashlight barely pierced the gloom as she retraced her steps to the second floor, where she'd dropped her coat earlier. The hallway seemed longer now. The walls, closer. As she passed the mirror room, she didn't look in. She didn't need to. She could feel it watching her. Her keys weren't there. Not on the floor. Not in the coat pocket. Not in her gear bag. But the attic hatch string hung low again. No. She shook her head. No way I dropped them up there. But a breeze, cold and sour, blew gently across the back of her neck. From above. She had to look. Natalie climbed the ladder again, careful, one step at a time. The attic was silent, still littered with boxes and covered furniture. Nothing had moved. Except one thing. The red mirror. It now stood at the far end of the attic, propped against the wall like it had been waiting. And on the floor in front of it, her car keys. Natalie approached slowly, her boots echoing hollowly across the boards. As she reached down, she kept her eyes off the glass, focusing only on the keys. Her fingers touched them. And the mirror changed. The surface rippled, then became as clear as water. She couldn't help it, she looked. Not at herself. But at the window. The mirror showed the widow's walk at the top of the house. The locked, rotting platform she hadn't dared explore yet. In the reflection, a pale woman stood there barefoot, hair whipping in the wind, her face turned toward the forest. Her mouth was sewn shut. Slowly, she turned, and smiled at Natalie. The mirror cracked, just a spiderweb fracture, but deep. Natalie turned and ran. Some doors only open once. Others are mirrors. She flipped it over. Something was written on the back now. Not in Clara's handwriting. In her own. If the story can't end, then you must remove the narrator. She dropped the letter. Her hands trembled. It was the only way. Equilare, ekara now, was no longer a single form. It was interpretation. It was language. It could wear anyone. Be anyone. As long as the name had a voice to speak it. It would survive. And Natalie was the only one who still carried all the names. #the ritual. She lit the match. She took out the last of the journal scraps, the bits she hadn't dared burn before. She placed them in a dish of salt, sat them atop the ash of the Delacroix notes. And then she whispered her name. Not just Natalie. Her full name. Natalie Delacroix Reyes. For the first time in her life, she claimed it. And then, softly, she said, "I give it back." And burned it. In the motel room. Jordan dropped her coffee mug. She gasped as if emerging from underwater. Her head jerked sideways. Her reflection was gone. No twin. No watcher. Just her. Panting. Alone. And the papers she had submitted? Corrupted. Blank. Symbols scrambled. Names erased. She blinked. What the hell just happened? She didn't remember writing anything. Only that, something had watched. Back in the bookstore. Natalie sat in darkness. No mirrors. No name. She didn't remember what she had just done. But she felt lighter. For the first time since childhood, truly weightless. She looked at Clara's letter again. It was blank. A clean page. Waiting for something new. Winter came early. Natalie sat behind the counter of the bookstore, watching snow drift through the quiet street. She didn't remember much these days, not clearly. Names faded faster. Faces blurred in her memory like old Polaroids left in the sun. She still opened the shop. Still swept the floor. Still watered the plants that hadn't died yet. But no one called her by name anymore. And that was how she wanted it. There were no mirrors. No photos. No internet. Only books. Old ones. Paper-bound, spine-creased, smelling of time. One sat always open on the counter. Its title page was blank. Its pages, pristine. It waited. Across the country. Jordan Reyes transferred schools. She told her advisor she was burnt out, though the truth was stranger. She couldn't recall what her thesis was. Couldn't find any of her notes. Her paper, one she swore she'd uploaded, was missing. No draft. No backup. Just a notebook with blank pages. Sometimes she thought of the shard she found in that field. But the memory unraveled the harder she tried. At night, she dreamed of forests. And whispers in glass. But when she woke, the dreams faded fast. She didn't fear them. She just felt hollow. Like something had been taken from her. In the woods. Where hollow pines once stood, nothing grew. But in the center of the overgrown clearing, beneath the frost-bitten moss, something stirred. Not a tree. Not a house. Just a space. Perfectly shaped. Mirror smooth. Waiting. Not calling. Not reaching. Just remembering. Back in the bookstore. Natalie turned a page. The blank book in front of her shifted. Lines appeared faintly, scratches at first, then shapes. She didn't move. Didn't write. But the page knew. And across the white parchment appeared a single phrase. The house is gone. The face is gone. But names, still echo. She didn't react. She closed the book. Locked it in the drawer. Lit a candle. And sat in silence. Spring came late that year. The frost lingered in the northern towns, clinging to the windows like breath long after the snow had gone. In one such town, far from the woods and far from Natalie, a little girl named Lena sat in her room, drawing with a red crayon. She didn't speak much. Never had. Not since the day she wandered too far from her daycare and was found hours later at the edge of an empty clearing no one knew existed. She had no memory of where she'd gone. No answers. Only drawings. Her sketchbook. Page after page, her parents found them. Trees with too many roots. Eyes on the trunks. Hands growing from the grass. Faces without mouths. And one recurring shape, always in red. A mirror. Sometimes whole. Sometimes cracked. Sometimes empty. #at night. Lena didn't sleep well. She sat on her bed, staring into the darkness where her closet stood. Her nightlight hummed softly, shaped like a smiling moon. And sometimes, just sometimes, she whispered things. Things no one had taught her. Names that didn't exist. Elka. Arahil. Natel. Her parents heard her once. Asked her where she learned those words. She only said. The girl in the mirror told me. #elsewhere, in the bookstore. Natalie woke up at the counter. Again. The book was open. She didn't remember opening it. But a new page had appeared. A child's drawing. Rough. Shaky. In red. A house with no door. A face in every window. She stared at it for a long time. And then, beneath the sketch, a sentence began to scrawl itself, slowly. I don't know who I am. But I remember you. Natalie stood. Her breath caught. She whispered to the room. Where are you now? And the book turned another page. Blank. Then words bled through. Too far to hear. But close enough to draw. Natalie hadn't left town in months. The bookstore was her sanctuary. Her exile. The space she chose to forget in. But the drawing in the book, a house with no door, had unsettled her more than any whisper, any reflection, any echo. She had seen that house before. Long ago, before the face had a name. Before she and Clara met. Before her mother stopped saying bedtime stories aloud and began muttering them under her breath, afraid they might answer back. Natalie remembered. The drawings. The red crayon. She had drawn them once. Before Hollow Pines ever came to her. It hadn't been the beginning. She had just forgotten the true start. #Lena's world. Her parents took her to therapy. They showed the sketchbook to a specialist. He smiled gently, praised her creativity. It's just an imagination thing, he said. But when he left the room and flipped to the last page, his smile dropped. It was a picture of him. Sitting in a chair. Eyes covered in stitches. And beneath the drawing, written in crooked red. You will forget this by morning. And he did. Natalie's decision. She locked the bookstore. Left a note on the door. Closed until the names stopped echoing. She didn't take much. A coat. The book. The candle Clara gave her before the final burning. And the small key LaRue once mailed her in silence. She didn't know where Lena was. But she knew where the road would find her. Not all paths go forward. Some return. Some rewind. Some wait until someone remembers where to walk. #Hollow Pines again. It had changed. The trees were thinner now. The clearing smaller. But the space, the absence, was the same. No door. No house. No sound. Just a clearing of frost-covered grass and something beneath it, pulsing faintly, like a name being repeated in a child's breath. She knelt and opened the book. The pages flipped on their own. Stopped on a new one. A drawing of a girl in a window. Lena. And the words. She doesn't know what she's hearing. But she's listening. Natalie closed her eyes. The wind whispered names through the pines. None of them hers. Not anymore. She whispered back. I hear you. She hadn't used her crayons the night before. Her parents were sure of it. They had tucked her in. Checked the floor. Closed the closet door. But there on her desk sat a new drawing. A single eye. Drawn perfectly. Too perfectly for a 6-year-old's hands. Her mother found it and gasped. Lena. Where did this come from? Lena just looked up. I think it's watching me again. Hashtag in the pines. Natalie sat in a clearing, sketchbook open across her lap. The frost never fully melted here, even in spring. She ran her fingers across the newest page, a self-portrait she hadn't drawn. In it, she sat in the woods. And in her hand, a thread. A red string that stretched across the page. Into another panel, where a small girl sat on her bed, holding the other end. Natalie whispered. So she hears me. The wind responded. Not a whisper. Not a voice. But a pull. A slow tightening of the thread. Hashtag Lena's world. That night, Lena refused to sleep. She sat cross-legged at the foot of her bed, the drawing clutched in her hand. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. But when her parents checked on her, she said. The lady in the woods is coming. She has the other end of the string. Her parents said nothing. Because they had begun hearing things too. Their voices echoing back at them in the hallway. Mirrors smudged with tiny fingerprints they hadn't left. And the eyes. Everywhere now. Watching from unplugged screens, from dark windows, from the backs of their eyelids when they tried to sleep. That same hour, in the clearing. Natalie lit the candle. The page glowed faintly. Then, for the first time in a long time, she wrote something. Not a memory. A message. In red ink, she scrawled. It's not your fault. I hear you. I'm coming. And across the miles, in Lena's room. The same message appeared on the back of her drawing. Lena blinked. Smiled. And whispered. She has a name again. Natalie had no address. No GPS. No phone. But the thread, that faint, silent pull inside her bones, led her forward. Through the woods. Over frost-laced fields. Along back roads only the lost ever traveled. And one evening, as dusk turned the sky to blood and ash, she stopped in front of a 2-story brick house on the edge of a small town. No lights in the windows. But she knew. Lena was inside. And so was it. Hashtag inside the house. Lena was drawing again. Not with red crayon this time, but her fingertip, tracing loops across the fogged window of her room. Her mother watched from the doorway, arms folded tight across her chest. She hadn't slept. Neither had her husband. The house had begun to change. Slightly. Subtly. The angles of rooms didn't feel quite right anymore. Their voices echoed even when they whispered. The hallway lights flickered, even though the bulbs were new. Worst of all, Lena had stopped responding to her name. She only listened when they said, you. Hashtag Natalie approaches. She didn't knock. She stood at the door, hand hovering over the wood, eyes closed. And whispered. "You've been heard, little one." The door creaked open. No wind. No footsteps inside. Just acceptance. She stepped in. Instant cold. Walls too narrow. Ceiling too high. She walked down the hall, heart thudding, and saw Lena's mother at the end of it. The woman blinked. "Who?" "I'm here for her," Natalie said gently. The woman tried to speak again, but her voice repeated. Echoed. As if something was trying to learn her speech as she spoke. Natalie brushed past her. Climbed the stairs. In Lena's room. The child sat cross-legged on the floor, back to the door. In her lap, a new drawing. Natalie stepped into the room, and froze. Lena was drawing Natalie. Perfectly. Too perfectly. As if she'd seen her for years. Natalie dropped to her knees beside her. The air in the room was wrong. Too thick. Breathing. She spoke softly. "I know what's happening. It's not your fault." Lena finally looked at her. And Natalie gasped. Her eyes were mirrors. Tiny, glimmering, silver black. Not corrupted. But open. Lena whispered. "He's not trying to take me. He's trying to be me." And behind them, the closet door creaked open. The closet door groaned wider behind them. But Natalie didn't turn around. She kept her eyes on Lena, on the mirror glint in her gaze, the stillness in her body, the tension just beneath her childlike posture. She wasn't possessed. She wasn't afraid. She was waiting. Natalie asked, gently. "Do you know what it is?" Lena nodded slowly. "It doesn't remember what it used to be. But it knows how to find others who feel the same." Natalie swallowed hard. "What does it want now?" The air behind her shifted. The shadows deepened. Behind the door. Natalie turned slowly. There was no shape inside the closet. No limbs. No face. Just wrongness. The suggestion of a figure, something unfinished. Like a sculpture in the middle of being carved, constantly shifting. Sometimes taller than the doorframe. Sometimes small as a child. Its voice came from around it, not inside. "You gave me a name once. Then you took it away. You burned my house. You broke my face. But I am what is left." "The feeling of not knowing who you are." Natalie whispered. "Your memory." "No." "Your fear." "No." "Then what are you?" The room pulsed with silence. And then it said. "I am you when you were still afraid to be. I am what never got named. Name me." The choice. Lena stood, walking to Natalie's side. She took her hand. The light in her mirrored eyes flickered like candlelight. The voice asked again, quieter. "If I had a name, I wouldn't need yours. I wouldn't steal faces. I could stop growing inside children. I could belong." Natalie looked down at Lena. Then into the shadow. And then said. "Then I will name you." The room trembled. Every light in the house blinked. Even the reflection of Natalie and Lena in the window paused, as if afraid to witness what came next. The naming. Natalie stepped forward. She placed her hand on the edge of the closet door. And whispered. "You are hollow." The voice shuddered. "Hollow. You are hollow, because you were left behind. Because we buried what scared us. Because no one gave you a place. I am, you are not a god. You are not a monster. You are hollow. You are memory that grew without love." The shifting figure froze. It began to fold inward, like paper burned from the edges. The mirror light in Lena's eyes dimmed. She blinked. Just once. Clear. Human. Natalie turned to her. He doesn't need you anymore. Will he come back? Not if we remember what he became. Now that it has a name, will someone one day call it? Here is the next ethereal and reflective chapter of The House Beyond Hollow Pines. The shadows receded like mist. The figure in the closet collapsed inward, not in pain, not banished, but folded. Like a chapter closing. Like a breath being held for the last time. No scream. No flash. Just a final whisper as it vanished. Thank you. Then silence. Natalie let go of the closet door. Lena stood beside her, blinking in the sudden calm. Her eyes no longer held that shimmering glass. Her hand gripped Natalie's tighter than before. Is he gone? Lena asked. Natalie knelt. Brushed the girl's hair from her face. He is. Because he doesn't have to pretend anymore. Lena tilted her head. What if someone says his name again? Natalie hesitated. Then nodded, slowly. Then we remind them what the name means. And we don't let them forget. Hashtag 3 days later. Lena stopped drawing mirrors. She smiled more. Spoke more. Her parents didn't ask too many questions. They just knew the house felt warmer now. The light stayed steady. The reflections were quiet again. Before Natalie left, she handed Lena a notebook. Blank. On the inside cover, a note. Tell stories. But don't let them grow alone. N. Hashtag Natalie returns. She didn't go back to the bookstore. It had served its purpose. She took only what she needed. Clara's candle, the last blank page of the journal, and a folded piece of linen. Inside it, the smallest shard of the mirror. Still red. Still whole. But quiet. Natalie didn't destroy it. Not this time. She buried it beneath a tree just off the trail, where the ground still remembered frost but had started to thaw. Over it, she carved a name. Hollow. Once unnamed. Now at rest. Hashtag the world moves on. People still forget things. Children still imagine monsters in the dark. But sometimes, when they whisper strange words into their pillows or draw unblinking eyes with red crayon, they pause. And right underneath them. Not real. Just hollow. And that makes it okay. Because something with a name can be talked about. And something talked about, doesn't have to hide. Here is the penultimate and tension-laced chapter of The House Beyond Hollow Pines. Natalie hadn't written in weeks. Not since the burial. Not since the naming. She wandered now. Not as a haunted woman, not even as a guardian, but as something quieter. Lighter. She slept in borrowed rooms, helped small libraries shelve old collections, and drank coffee at roadside diners where no one asked questions. And yet, the book followed her. Always closed. Always quiet. Until now. Hashtag that night. She found herself in a tiny inn in a town whose name didn't matter. The rain tapped softly on the windows. The power flickered twice, but held. She sat at the small wooden desk. Lit Clara's candle. Pulled the book from her bag. And this time, when she opened it, there was a page waiting. Not blank. Not a child's drawing. A letter. Addressed to her. In her handwriting. But, older. Sharper. Dear Natalie. You did well. The child is safe. The mirror sleeps. The house no longer remembers. But I do. And if you're reading this, it means I was right. The story never truly ends. It only waits for a new author. Which is why I left you one final page. One last name. Not hollow. Not Ecolare. Not even me. It's the name of the first face. The one we all forgot. Natalie's mouth went dry. She turned the page.